squeeze from every direction, that if you actually work for a living rather than relying on government, you will get relief from the cost of living crisis. What has this government done? They've put the whole country on welfare for about, well, half the country on welfare for about 3 months, extend your train discount, and that's around about it. After that, you're left to your own devices, and if you earn over $70,000, you get nothing at all. Interestingly, in the Treasury's forecast, when I first said it would be a brain drain budget, I didn't imagine that the Treasury itself is now forecasting a lower New Zealand population than it had forecast back in December. Even the Treasury is now forecasting a brain drain, and that's why we say it's a brain drain budget. When you look at the situation of someone earning over $70,000, perhaps a family trying to pay their mortgage or trying to pay their rent, they're actually absolutely no better off. And that's why ACT's alternative budget would have given, say, a nurse on $70,000, $2,300 better off a year by reducing taxes. We needed to reduce expenditure. We needed to reduce taxes to give people relief against the price increases we've already seen. Instead, the Treasury's forecasts say we will have 5.2% inflation next year. It was going to be down to 3.1 according to the December forecast. It's got worse. In fact, every forecast has got worse. We were going to have a $15 billion, the peak of debt is now $15 billion worse. The interest on debt per year is now $1.7 billion worse, and inflation is now 2 percentage points worse than forecast in December. Because it's failed to give hope, the risk is that more and more people with get up and go are going to get up and leave, and that is tragic for our country. It makes me so mad that Grant Robertson could not get over his ideological bent against cutting taxes, that he's left a whole lot of people with very little to hope for. And that's before you get to some of the longer term issues that we dealt with in our alternative budget. How do you adjust superannuation to make it fiscally sustainable? How do you simplify taxes to create a culture of work savings and investment? How do you make it easier for foreign investors to send capital to New Zealand? And how do you ensure that our productivity increases? Because at the moment we're being overtaken by Slovenia, by Czech Republic, by Lithuania, by countries, and good on them, by the way, that we used to feel sorry for as members of the Soviet Socialist Republic Union. Instead, they are now richer than us, and Australia has seen its median wage increase $6,600 faster under 5 years of Labor. So that's our take on it all, but happy to take your questions as well.
What's so dramatic about inflation? Other countries are seeing inflation rates even higher than ours.
Well, it's all very well to say it's worse somewhere else, but two things. That's because other countries have the same stupid tax and spend policies. Doesn't mean we can't do better. And second of all, if you're seeing your rent go up, your food go up, your petrol go up, your taxes go up, and you can't make ends meet at the end of the week, and you have to actually decide whether to buy rugby boots or hockey boots for which kid, then all of a sudden someone saying another country is bad too doesn't really help you out. The government can control certain things. It did have the option of reducing spending. It did have the option of reducing taxes. Instead, it has decided to kick the can down the road. 3 months of basically half the country being on welfare, a little bit more cheap train fares, and that's it. And I think that is really disappointing. And people will see that it is relatively more attractive now to go to other countries where, yes, they have some similar problems, but they also have much higher wages.
The cost of living payment puts cash back in people's pockets. It puts tax back in people's pockets. You'd support that, wouldn't you?
Well, I support people being able to fight the cost of living crisis, but two things. If you carry on spending at the rate you will, that fiscal stimulus is going to continue inflation, and that's what Treasury are now forecasting, over 5% next year. That's not this year, but next year still 5%, so this cost of living crisis is a long way to go, bearing in mind that's 5% on top of the increases we had this year. Next thing I'd say is that they could have done it by reducing taxation. There's been so much increase in taxation, you know, for a single person, or for every person in New Zealand, when this government was elected, it was $15,000 per person in taxation. Now it's over $21,000 per person taxed by this government. If you look at Australia, 27.7% of their economy is taxed. Here it's 30.4%. So you're 2.5% of GDP lower taxed in Australia, and that's why it's a brain drain budget, because it's attractive to go over there.
80% of Kiwis get some sort of cost of living, the bottom 80%. Are you really saying that the top 20% need help?
It's actually not like that. If you talk about 2.1% of people, 2.1 million people, getting this 3 months of extra relief, that's it. No, there's no tax relief, not only for the top 20%, there's no tax relief for anybody. ACT's alternative budget would have said to, say, someone on 70 grand, perhaps a nurse in the mid-range, will let you keep an extra $2,300 a year of your own money. That's what we're talking about with real relief. Under Labor, they get $350 for 3 months because Labor is so addicted to spending on everything else.
The Treasury also anticipated that low and middle income people would be the hardest hit by inflation costs. Under your alternative budget, people that live in the wage would just get over $100 for a year. Here they're getting 3 times that. And does that not make more sense to give the lower people who would be hit harder slightly more money?
Well, you got to remember, people also have greater costs. So I'm thinking about people that have kids that are trying to support families, people with mortgages, people that are having to rent houses for kids as well. Actually, what our alternative budget would have done is given everybody at least $200. That's our carbon refund. So we'd be giving close to what they're giving, whereas what Labor's doing is giving a whole lot of corporate welfare to various businesses to experiment with carbon reducing technology, even though we've already capped New Zealand's emissions under the ETS, so it's futile and it's wasteful. So no, actually people would be about as well off at practically every income level, and at income levels where people are really stretched, it's sort of family income people in the high tens of thousands of dollars, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, they would have been a lot better off, thousands of dollars a year better off. The other thing I'd say is that the amount of government spending we have right now is inflationary. That means that to kill inflation, interest rates have to rise. If the Grant Robertson doesn't stop spending, then Adrian Orr will have to kill inflation by rising your mortgage rates even further, and that's going to hurt people.
What were your thoughts on when it came out today about the sole parent beneficiary child payments have been going to the Crown rather than to parents? Is that, I mean, what are your views on that?
Look, I actually think it's a positive development. I think that we want parents to pay, and in order for, frankly, we don't want deadbeat dads who don't pay for their kids. If they know the money's going to the kid, then I think they're more likely to pay. And frankly, if it means that kids in those situations get more money, then that's probably one of the more helpful things we can do, because you're targeting money to kids from broken homes and you're rewarding good behaviour of supporting your kids.
Do you think that's ridiculous, though, that that's been happening for decades? This is like thousands of children being pulled out of poverty. I mean, is that not ridiculous?
Look, I think if you look at it, I support the change. Should it have been different for a long time? I guess there's always been a debate about whose liability it is if you have kids and who should pay, and if the government's giving you a benefit, maybe that's your lot. I think the argument you can make against that is that you effectively had a 100% abatement rate on parents who were giving support payment for their kid that they've been separated from. So that you could argue it either way. I think that's why it's taken a long time, but they've got to the right place in my view.
Does that support the fuel rebate being extended for 2 months?
Look, no, we don't. Our policy is to give the proceeds from the emissions trading scheme, depending on the year, forecast to be anywhere from $187 to $250 for each and every individual in your household. So it could be $1,000 rebate for a family of 4. We believe that is a much better way to distribute money than 25 cents that they're going to have to cancel at some point. I mean, they're only shifting it a few months, then they're going to do the same thing anyway.
ACT would do it now, so if you would go to
Well, ACT would never have introduced it. So if you want to play the hypothetical game. Yeah, and you'd be getting $1,000 for a family of 4 to help defray that cost. And in addition, our policy of a carbon rebate makes the commitment to the ETS much more politically sustainable over time. So we would look after people there. And now the government's got itself in an impossible position. It thought the fuel price would be down now, but it's not. So they've kicked the can down the road. The fuel price is still higher. In a few months' time, they're going to kick the can again. I mean, it's a silly policy.
What do you like about the longer, the bigger ticket items, the health reforms, big spending there? What do you say to the argument that the government has to take bold action and invest in the future of New Zealand?
Well, show us the outcomes. I mean, I don't see this government being focused on outcomes from healthcare. What they're spending more money, and that's good. It's necessary, particularly with the inflation affecting nurses. We would argue that if under our tax package, nurses and police and teachers and fire people would be much better off anyway. But they're going to have to do something for medical workers who have really been facing a lot of pressure and are at risk of leaving. Have they designed a system of outcome measurement into the new system after they got rid of it in the current one? I doubt it. So in our view, we need to be clear that this extra money is not going to become the metric by which we evaluate the health system. We don't want a healthcare system, whereas if you spend lots of money, that's a good thing regardless of outcome. We want a healthcare system where we measure the outcomes, how many people get access, how many people get treatment, how many people get operations, and then say, was that a good use of our money? That's one concern. And frankly, the other issue is, I was talking to someone the other day, she's been an anaesthetist for 40 years. I said, how will these healthcare systems change your job? And before I said job, she knew my question. She just said, it won't. And I said, wow, cynical. She said, yeah, I've seen this movie before. So I'm concerned about, will these reforms change the administrative structure, or will they actually make healthcare workers more productive? Better ICT, I've got hope for that in the budget. Better pharmaceuticals, very glad about that. But at the same time, I worry that we're just going to end up with the same system with a different org chart, and that's a real concern.
What's the difference between giving $350 back to Kiwis as a cost of living payment and ACT giving $150 back to Kiwis from the emissions trading scheme? It's the same thing.
No, it's not. This is a permanent and sustainable policy. At the moment, everyone pays their ETS fees when they buy petrol, electricity, whatever, and you don't see that money again. It gets divvied up and given to a bunch of businesses that say they're going to reduce their carbon cost. If we gave it to people, I think you would see the ETS become politically durable for decades, which a climate policy needs to be. So even if there was no cost of living crisis right now, ACT's policy of a carbon refund would actually be good policy. Even the Green Party have actually supported it in the past, but it does have the advantage that at the current circumstances, it would also help people with a cost of living crisis.
But why is $150 from the ETS helpful, and $350 for the cost of living is a drop in the bucket?
Well, first of all, it's 187 minimum. It's up to 250 in some years. Second of all, ours is per household member, so it's actually can be, $1,000 could be $1,500 for some large families. And thirdly, it's in combination with an entire fiscal strategy to reduce expenditure and reduce taxes without touching health education or any frontline service that gives thousands of dollars back to families and reduced taxes. So really, the comparison between what we're proposing and their, 3 months of welfare for half the country, you got to be kidding.
Does that support the parliamentary buildings being funded and on house refit?
Yeah, look, we have said we'd support that. We think that ultimately, a parliamentary democracy is something a lot of people around the world would love to have. Some people are fighting very hard for that right now. We're not into largesse. I think it's crazy they want to make the building out of wood, but we're not going to play politics over a parliamentary building. You've got to have one.
168 million is being given to the Māori Health Authority to commission whole to Māori health services. What do you think of that? It seems like devolution.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way we look at it is that we need devolution right across the board. My question is, why is everything being racialised? I mean, the health spend on Māori should be about $3.5 billion just by percentage of population. It may be different for health status and vulnerability. It could be more, it could be less due to the youth of the population. But nevertheless, we should be spending billions of dollars on Māori health. But actually, why don't we have a policy of devolution for Pacifica health, for Asian health, for rural health? There's a whole lot of people who have different challenges when it comes to healthcare, and we should be trying to accommodate them all. What ACT resents is that we have, first of all, a sort of co-governance of healthcare where two entities can veto each other's national health plans. We think that's wrong. And second of all, we've only done it for one category of people. Actually, individuals are rich in their diversity and identity, and we should be looking to devolve for all reasons. Well, that's your view. I actually think that you've got an updated interpretation of the treaty. You should try those papers that I was quoting the other day from Dame Anne Salmon. It might change your mind. All right. Thank you very much. Cheers.